So your presenters today is myself. I am Leonne Barker, a consultant here at RTO Works. I have over 20 years experience in education regulation, starting out, in non-state schooling, CRICOS auditing, moving into many RTOs since then as well, and now in the consulting space. And I will introduce the amazing Sally Tansley. She's our founding force. Many of you will already know Sally really well. There's no one more expert in RTOs and compliance than Sally, in my opinion. So you're in good hands today.
Thank you very much, Leonie. One thing you'll see about me today is that it's cold where I am because I've got my scarf on. Yeah, I have been in the industry since, 1995 now. So started off writing training packages, and yeah, here we are, 30 years later.
Sorry, guys, flicked ahead a bit too quickly there. So today we're going to be going over the assessment system, and in keeping with our car theme series, we really see the assessment system as the engine of your RTO. So today we'll be focusing on validation and a little bit also on RPL as the kind of assessment systems that are the focus of these activities, and we'll also be doing a group activity based on validation and risk, which is a little bit more important under the revised standards for RTOs.
Thanks, Leonie.
Okay. So we're going to have a poll question pop up for our participants there. It's on RPL. So see how you go with that one.
And we just thought we'd bring in RPL because, of course, we are talking about the assessment system and predominantly validation today, but RPL is so important as part of that validation process.
Absolutely. And Sally, can you elaborate a little bit more? We were talking about this earlier on the requirement to offer RPL and how ASCA interprets that.
Yeah, so in the old standards, it seemed to me it was much more prescriptive. It was kind of like, I can't remember the wording even now, but it was something like RPL must be provided. But in the new standards, in the revised standards, it talks about RPL must be offered. And particularly for those of you who operate predominantly with international students, we did come up against this quite a few times in an audit where auditors insisted that we had to have RPL tools. And eventually I did get, I communicated with ASCA and got a written communication from them, essentially saying that you should have a process in place, but you're not expected to have RPL tools. So I think it's the same. It's probably under the new standards. You need to offer it, but if you don't think that you're going to have to, if none of your cohort's really going to apply for it, then it's not really necessary for you to have RPL tools as such. You just need to have a process in place, because otherwise it's an unfair requirement for you guys to spend lots of money on RPL tools.
Yeah, that's I've seen that happen many times, and it can be quite a confusing requirement. So I think that's a really important distinction to make. RPL definitely has a place and it can be used really, really well. But yes, if you're a provider that's not going to be using that, then it's it's a huge investment.
Definitely, such an onerous process if done properly, though, isn't it? I mean, so many people just decide to opt for doing the qualification in the end because it's so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the context of validation, it's extremely important if you do RPL to make sure you do include those assessment judgments in your validation cycle and in your validation samples. You know, what I would always do is if I pulled the data for my 6-month period and there was any RPLs in there, I'd definitely make sure I included a good proportion of those in my validation.
Yes.
And, you know, one thing, of course, you know, always has been important, definitely continues to be very important under the revised standards, is that you need to make sure that your RPL kits are fit for purpose and that they very clearly explain to the candidate that what exactly is required. So that basically is, you know, what constitutes valid evidence, the process and the timelines for the RPL, and the support that is available to assist the candidate through the process.
Because you often do see quite poor quality RPL tools, don't you, Leonie? Things like, you know, just the performance criteria there for students to tick against and so on, and the assessor to mark against, and they're just, yeah, not fit for purpose.
Absolutely, and it leaves the assessor in a very vulnerable position, and it also, yeah, makes it very difficult for the candidate.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to validation, you know, a question we do get a bit is about, you know, who can validate, you know, how can we put together our validation team? Sally, I'll get you to take us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, this is sort of pretty, you know, straightforward. It's straight from the revised standards. You know, it has changed from previous standards, but essentially that validation can be conducted by one or more person who collectively possess those things that we can see there on the screen. The industry competencies, you know, noting that interesting deviation about practical understanding of current industry practices, and then obviously one of the credentials for validation, which you could look up in the credential policy. There is still, you know, the requirement in there that I'm just reading it quickly from the outcome standards, that the outcome of assessment validation isn't solely determined by a person who's designed and delivered the training or assessment. So that does mean that if the person had designed or delivered the assessment, it would need to be a group of 2 people at least then. So that's the old standards sort of talked about that person really wasn't considered to, you know, be part of the validation, but the new one kind of they are, but they can't do it on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can see from our poll that we have 64% of you are moderately confident in your RPL tools too, which is great.
It's really good.
With validation and consulting, because we do get a lot of providers approach us to do validation on their behalf. And what we do in those circumstances is we can certainly offer that as a service, but we do that in conjunction with a team that meets those requirements. So generally the lead validator and the subject matter expert will sign off on any validation that a consultant has done. So they'll check that, they'll make sure they agree with the findings, and then they'll also add in, you know, often, you know, very, you know, industry specific examples of what they might see needs to change.
Yeah.
Because obviously a consultant is generally not going to be a subject matter expert, given the huge variety of things we're looking at, from automotive to cookery to childcare. The list is huge.
And I mean, for the most part, Leonie, someone without subject matter expert can do it because they can look at the units of competency, but obviously there are some things that the subject matter expert only knows, you know, in the student's answers and so on. So you know, maybe even in the assessment, that you know the benchmark's not quite right or whatever. So that can then be, you know, the subject matter experts so useful there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had it where someone might be an expert in forklifts, for example, and they know that, you know, the name of a certain part is incorrect, but, you know, no one else is going to pick something like that up.
Yeah.
So definitely it's
Yeah.
always very important to ensure that they're involved in the process.
Yeah.
So the validation schedule, always a point of contention. And looking at, in this part of the presentation, what I was really thinking about is, I know a lot of you out there will have a schedule that's already been operating under the previous, well, the standards that we've got currently. But come for 1st July, you'll be looking at, okay, how do I adapt this? How do I work with what I've already got? How do I move forward from here? So, we used to have to do, 50% in the first few years, all of those things. That's all changed. Now, at a minimum, you just need to make sure that every training product is validated once every 5 years. But obviously, there's a huge risk approach that's come in as well. So, which has always been there, but, will also be incorporated more under the revised standards. Sally, I'll get you to just talk a little bit, because with this slide we've got that every training product validated once every 5 years. Can you go into a little bit of detail about what exactly a training product is?
So the definition of a training product is a qualification, a skill set, and a unit. So that does make that definition, their training product, a little open to interpretation. And in ASPA's current fact sheet on validation, which I'm sure is going to be, revised in the practice guides and so on, they talk about doing 2 units per qualification. So you can see there, there does become quite a lot of subjectivity about, what is a training product. But I think, as Leonie will talk about in the next slide, it does sort of, now it probably just boils down to risk as well. So that's how you that's really how you're determining so for example, a training product, if it's say first aid, that's pretty risky. It's important that students do get that right. So you would prioritize that, and that's a training product that's a unit of competency, possibly with say if you're delivering business courses, you might not validate every single unit, because there are some units in there that probably aren't high risk, say like managed meetings. If a student doesn't quite get managing meetings right, then it's kind of annoying, but it's not risky, so to speak.
Yeah, great. And I can see on the poll which has gone up there, thanks for jumping on that, everyone, that I think we've got 36% had ended up saying that they do have a documented risk matrix that informs their validation plan already. So that's fantastic. And for those of you that do need more guidance, this session should hopefully support you in that. And we'll have some more information about that Sally's got hot off the press as well. But yeah, risk will definitely impact your schedule, and should. And I would say, as a starting point with your schedules, I always used my TAS library as my starting point for what I would schedule for validation.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that, Leonie?
That means basically the suite of TASs. So I would use the TASs as the guide to what our training products were, because obviously a lot of RTOs might deliver single units. If you're delivering a single unit and you deliver that on its own, you should have a TAS for that unit. And that means that you would definitely have to validate that unit, even if you've got it included in another course or something else. So the TAS library is always the first place I would go to say, okay, what do we need to make sure we're validating? And obviously prioritizing what you're actually delivering, because sometimes RTOs, they have some things on scope that they may not actually be delivering. So I would always prioritize what you are actually delivering. As much as we'd love to say that we think every provider has got a completely functional and up-to-date validation schedule, it's certainly not what I've seen in my many years in this industry. It's something that can often be left, because it can be it can bring up a lot of worms in the can. And yeah, it does get put off, but it's a great time right now to get relook at your validation schedule and what you need to do to make it compliant.
Yeah.
So we've got a bit here about the validation risk indicators and cycles. And I know, oh, sorry, everyone, I've got a new mouse. Sally, can you talk us through what you recently found out at the ITECA workshop yesterday?
Yeah, so I attended the ITECA regulated ASCA regulated providers workshop through our membership of ITECA, and it was really around auditing under the revised standards. But one of the things that they did talk about was risk priorities, and ASCA has said that they'll be publishing those risk priorities in a couple of weeks' time. Obviously, risk priorities refer to a lot of things, and primarily they were talking about it as a audit focus, but obviously it filters down into everything. So ASCA's risk priorities are a good thing to look at in terms of validation as well. And they said that it wasn't going to be that different to last year. So yeah, I imagine the risk priorities. I mean, we can sort of all think about what they are anyway. It's things like short courses, risky courses like aged care, online learning perhaps. So there'll be a few risk priorities there, international providers and so on. So yeah, so it's worth taking a look at that to inform your validation too. And that's really what it's all about, I feel, in the new standards. It talks about a risk-based approach. And Leonie and I were talking this morning about the sample size calculator as well. And there's no longer that prescription around using the sample size calculator, even though, and they're basically saying in the standards that, you use your risk-based approach to determine the sample size of assessments. Anyway, back to Leonie, let's look at those indicators.
And I have kept the sample size calculator in our next activity, which I'll go through in a minute. And the reason for that is just to give you a starting point, because sometimes it can be really overwhelming to go, well, what on earth would ASCA expect? And I think that a lot of people will still probably use that calculator to guide them, but it's not prescriptive. It doesn't have to be that amount. It's just there to give you some guidance, and it's worth playing around with that calculator just to see, because we were going through this morning, a group of 1,000 students is going to give you a sample size of 41, whereas a group of 8 students will give you something like 7. So it just gives you a guide to what ASCA would deem as appropriate at the moment. That could change too. So, something to stay tuned on.
Although it's interesting, Leonie, because like you and I were talking as well, validation hasn't typically been looked at in an audit, although I'm noticing that it is more and more. But one thing I will say is that I've never been asked to justify the number of assessments that I've looked at, even with the old standards and the sample size calculator.
And that's excellent insight, because this is the stuff we need to know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's not always about audits when I say these things, but it is important to sort of understand where the regulator's coming from.
Very much. And Auburn, I'm going to get you to share the document for our activity. So Auburn's going to share in the chat the document that you will need for the activity. So please open that and download that if you can. You will need it to participate in the groups that we'll be working in a moment. So this activity, we've given you a list. Is that popping up in the notes, everyone? Yes,
it is for me. So
brilliant.
Let us know if it's not for anybody.
So we're going to work in groups. You'll be put into breakout rooms shortly. In those groups, please do unmute at a minimum, and turn your camera on if you can. If you're in your dressing gown and you really don't want to, we do understand, but it is great to be able to see some faces when we're working together. you'll review the qualification list and the risk factors in there and decide as a group where you think the risk level of each training product sits and what the approach to validation should be. So, you know, different ways you can look at risk and how you adapt your validation is, you know, you might validate more units in a qualification instead of the, you know, the usual 2 per qualification. You might look at 3, or you might look at making it a larger sample size if you think if you've got, you know, 8 trainers and you're not really sure if they're all doing the same thing. You might want to make sure you're getting at least a few from each trainer. So making sure that you're putting some thought into the different risk factors and how they affect the way that you will validate.
And Leonie, how long are we going to be doing this risk?
You'll be in the rooms for 8 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we'll pop out and have a quick debrief on how everyone went. I'll be able to go in and out of the rooms too, just to check in and see how everyone's going.
And yeah, if you can appoint a spokesperson to come back and report as well. Perhaps not each group will report, but
yeah. Last webinar, I think we got all the RTO Works staff were appointed as spokespeople. That won't be happening this time. We'd love to actually hear from you guys. It's a bit of a smaller, more intimate group too. So
yes,
we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, see you soon, everyone.
Ready to go in the breakout rooms.
Oh, I don't know about you, but that just went so quickly, hey? Leonie?
Yep.
Oh, you're there.
Time is too short. 8 minutes is too short, Leonie.
Yeah. We should have had more time for that. But anyway, we can sort of, you know, brainstorm what people talked about here. Leonie, do you want to select groups to talk about quickly?
Yeah, so can we hear from a spokesperson for group number 1 and just find out how you went? I mean, also just keep in mind, as I said to the group I was in, we didn't expect you to come up with a whole bunch of answers. We expected you to spark discussion and start thinking about these risk factors. And there's no right or wrong. So we just love to hear how, you know, what type of discussion you had, basically.
Was that our group 1? Was that my group 1?
Yes, I think so, Sally.
Oh, Kim, do you want to, thanks, Morgan, you're right. Do you want to quickly speak?
Yeah, no, I don't mind. We discussed by looking at the risk factor summary, what would be important to focus on first. And we spoke particularly in units that had high legislation and high WHS or high risk. We also spoke about, you know, managing and making sure that the cohorts are included. So if there was international, local, that to put your risk factor and making sure your sample size had different cohorts in there as well. And I think that's about it. I don't want to give away all of it. There might be other groups that want to talk, but it was a great discussion.
Yeah, it was. It was short, but it was really good.
Okay, great. And group number 2, that's one I was in. We've got a spokesperson that would like to share a bit about the discussion you had.
Let's not all fight each other, hey? So, look, taken the descriptor of the risk rating, went through, identified the level of risks for it. Look, given the info we had on the previous slides about a high risk or moderate risk, you know, it's sort of a little bit self-explanatory to say the frequency of the audit, remembering the validation is a diagnostic tool. You know, so I guess we're just there to understand, obviously, the principles and the rules are achieved. And based on that, we could then potentially either increase or decrease, but we could probably achieve that diagnosis by either increasing the sample size. Obviously, that sort of stuff's in your calculator as well, but we could get an understanding of the compliance without increasing the frequency more than the risk rating, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, that's really useful.
Yeah. Have we got anyone from group 3?
Yep. So I guess we had a few issues in terms of actually just getting the Word doc, you know, and actually getting started. So we probably didn't get as deep into it as we would have liked. We really just had a really close look at the first one there, where I guess we really had a good look at, first of all, the amount of students, you know, that went through there. So obviously that sort of increases the frequency. And what else did we look at? We also had a look at, I guess, you know, multiple trainers delivering it. We felt the risk of that one was high, potentially validating all units every month, potentially do one unit. We felt when we used the calculator, the sample size was extremely high. It was like 41, which, yeah, is obviously going to be very time consuming. So we don't know how accurate or whether how realistic that would be. But that was really the only one we got to look at, and then we kind of ran out of time. So apologies for that.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. Yeah, as I said, you know, when I've been at audits, no one's ever mentioned the sample size calculator, and I found as an auditor, just looking at it from an audit perspective, but when I've been reviewing assessments, I only probably need to look at 3 or 4 to see, you know, issues and patterns, potentially sometimes even less as well. And as we said as well, the most important thing is that the standards allow you to determine your own risk-based approach. So as long as you can justify it based on each individual qualification and so on, then I think it's really up to you. And like Leonie said, the sample size calculator can sometimes be handy, but I always definitely did find that the sample size was really big and time consuming, like you say.
Yeah. I'm just working out my slides here, everybody. Are you all able to see the slides again?
Yes, yeah, we can. It's just on the slide that we had before though, Leonie. Yeah, so just move it on. Yeah.
I'm just trying to do that. Give me a second. Give me 2 seconds. Okay. So just running through some of the things that you would see that us would check. I think you've covered this a bit already, Sally, with the calculator. But yeah, what are the types of things that you have seen us would check in audits?
Yeah, so basically, first of all, do you actually have a validation schedule? You know, like everything, have you have you actually implemented it as you said you would? And if you didn't, why didn't you? And where is that evidence? You know, look, what we were just talking about predominantly are the risk factors there. I mean, that table that we shared with you for the activity, that could be something that could be adapted or used, you know. They want to know, has the validation been carried out by the appropriately qualified team? So that's basically what we showed before, right at the beginning, about who can be involved in validation. And most importantly, are the validations outcomes documented and acted upon? So you would use a validation tool, which you would record all your finding in, and at the end you'd have your actions, which you would then carry out and potentially then summarize in your continuous improvement register, or you could just have an assessment validation register, whatever works best. So that's really what they'll mainly check for.
Yeah, great.
It's interesting, isn't it, Leonie? Because one more just quick thing there that you and me were talking about yesterday was that you know, now that the revised standards talk about assessment review, and we've seen in an audit report that an ASQA finding was that they didn't do the assessment review as part of the validation. So that's a really interesting thing to kind of think about, because for me personally, you do your assessment review. Okay, you've confirmed that your test assessment tool meets requirements, principles, evidence, rules of evidence, and so on. And then you go on to validation and you review your student work. And so I don't really see why you would go back to looking to see if there, you know, a full sort of bore review of your assessment as part of that validation process, but it would definitely inform it because, you know, say lots of students were getting things wrong, then that would tell you that the question wasn't quite tight enough and so on. But it's a different approach. So that's quite interesting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you might see some changes come through in relation to that, I would say. One of the things we were going to do for you today is provide you with an assessment schedule template, which we know is already part of our RMS.
You mean a validation schedule?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Oh,
yeah.
sorry, guys. A validation schedule template. So but in light of this, the risk information that will be released soon, we're revising that. So once we do have that, we will send that out to everyone who's participated in this webinar and also to everyone who's purchased our RMS, I would say, Sally.
Yes.
So yes, stay tuned. As things are updated, we'll also be updating on our end. Okay, so the next webinar that we have on is scheduled for 11 a.m. on Thursday, the 3rd of July. We would love to see you there. Hopefully we will. We will probably look at leaving a bit more time because that discussion we were having was really great in the breakout rooms. And I think there's probably more we can do there in our next session. Okay, so time for questions. Let's keep your RTO's assessment engine running smoothly. Is there any questions that anyone has that haven't been answered already today?
So Sonia just said, is there a post-assessment tool you can share? So I suppose that means the validation tool. Is that something that we would do, Leonie?
What, can you repeat the question, Sally? I missed it.
Sonia in the chat, she says, is there a post-assessment tool you can share?
Post-assessment validation tool?
Yeah, I suppose that post-assessment, what Sonia means is validation.
Yeah, we certainly do have that. It's part of our RMS. Whether we could share that as part of today, I'll have to leave up to Sally. She'll be able to make the call on that.
Yes, we'll do that. If you'd like,
great.
just please contact us.
Yeah, great. Yeah, if you don't already have our RMS, then yes, contact us and we can give you a copy of that tool.
Yeah, so just contact us, Sonia, through hello@rtoworks.com.au or you know, or phone us and someone will sort that out for you. Yeah, I think the
I have a quick question.
Yes, sorry, Mohammed. Yes, carry on.
So, like in my RTO or the RTO I work for, there is a different sort of qualification. Let's say health qualification, community services, business. So my background is business and accounting, and yeah. So can I be the lead validator in childcare qualification?
Well, you could, but you'd have to have someone who's got the industry, what it's called now. I used to call it vocational competencies, but industry competencies. So you'd have to have someone on you could be the lead validator, so to speak, but you've got to have other people who form all those requirements, which is essentially a subject matter expert. But say you hadn't designed or delivered an assessment and it's an accounting one, which you do have a background in, strictly speaking, you could just do that all by yourself. As I said, you know, most of us can actually do it without being a subject matter expert, but the rules the rules do require that, and there can be benefit in that.
Okay. One more question. I have 3 questions, Sally. Sorry.
That's all right. And I'm Beata, I'll get to your question after Mohammed's too as well. I've seen that in the chat.
So as per the fact sheet, it is coming fact sheet that we are looking at validation itself means the looking at the process. Now, you mentioned that we have to look at the quality of the assessment. Is it a one-off audit outcome, or it's just, it is the practice nowadays?
Sorry, Mohammed, what do you mean?
So, like you mentioned that that we have to look at the principles or rules of evidence and principles of assessments and all.
Yeah, you mean in terms of the assessment review,
Yes.
the pre-review, I don't like the term, but pre-validation.
Yeah, so you mentioned that in one of the audits, the auditor, or you saw an audit report
Oh, yeah.
that they were asking that the RTO was not
Yeah.
looking at that. So is it a one-off or it is a trend?
Well, I think that probably arose because of the revised, that was the old standards, and we didn't have assessment review in that. So I think that will sort of become, defunct, and that was probably, just a one-off again, just that sort of inconsistency in auditor, decision making. I haven't really seen that before.
Okay.
But I think, under the revised standards, it won't be such an issue because it does require assessment review and validation.
Okay. So my last question is regarding RPL. So in one qualification, there is so many different units, and it requires different skills. So when one RTO assesses one student, can a student get 100% RPL? Like, there must be a gap. And what is the action the RTO can take from that point of view?
Well, I suppose a student can get 100% RPL. I actually used to teach on an accredited course. We developed it as well. That's now no longer current. It was the Graduate Diploma of Vet Quality and Compliance Management, and I did 100% RPL with someone from that. We spent weeks and weeks gathering the evidence. But if there are gaps, then you can do things like, you could do you use one of your assessments for, say the person didn't have any skills in, well, I don't know, managing payroll, perhaps they could just do the assessment.
Okay, so some, maybe the student or the candidate is they competed in part of that unit. So can we use the assessment partially based on the mapping?
Yeah, you could. Yeah. You just have to do a really sort of, detailed sort of, you have to make sure you record that in the RPL tool.
Thanks, Sally.
Oh, that's all right. So someone asks, does the RTO, Beata asks, does the RTO require validation policy and procedure under the revised standards? I kind of don't. I prefer sort of broader policies and procedures. So, for example, in our RTO management system, we have a training and assessment policy and procedure, and that covers development of training and assessment strategies, industry engagement, learning resources review, assessment review, and also validation. So for me, I prefer it in a broader policy and procedure, but you can do it in any way you like. And again, reiterating the intent of the outcome standards. Yeah, it's up to you how you do it. So if that works for you to have a validation policy and procedure, you can have it part as a broader procedure, as long as it's clear how it's done. Yeah. And Ranveer asks, can the subject matter experts be your own staff, or do they have to be from outside? Yeah, they can be your own staff. So, a trainer and assessor is a subject matter expert.
Yeah, absolutely. You're just trying to avoid having people validate assessment that they have assessed themselves. But RTOs often have more than one subject matter expert in an area. And also you can have other members of the validation team look at assessments that a subject matter expert has looked at as well.
And then Julia says, is the assessment review tool for each unit in the qualification, or can we choose a few units only? Now, I definitely think that that's not very clear in the standards, but personally speaking, I would say it's everyone. It just says, I'm just looking at the outcome standards now, assessment tools are reviewed, so it doesn't sort of say all assessment tools, but I think the intent is that they should all be reviewed.
Yeah, and would you say, Sally, that in audit, that assessment is one of the major areas of audit? So it's always a good, I would say, for every provider, unless you're 100% confident in your assessment tools, this is a really good opportunity to review those tools and make sure they are fit for purpose, because if something goes wrong at audit and in the assessment space, the consequences can be really harsh, and it's worth getting ahead of that and making sure you're confident about your tools.
Although I was having a bit of a laugh with Mohammed actually on the phone last night, and I'm sort of foreseeing that at audit what we'll get findings that say your assessment review system wasn't working because we found non-compliance with assessment tool. So that's the next
no doubt
finding I think we're going to see. That's
sorry, Sally, I have one more question. So this is a very confusing question for most of us. Is okay, we deliver qualifications and single units. For example, a first aid unit, which is not part of any qualification. So what SQL consider as a product? So is it the training package or qualification itself? And
yes, yeah. So you must so I did say at the beginning, Mohammed, training product is actually a qualification, a unit and a skill set, which makes the terminology difficult, doesn't it?
yes. So if it is the case, then we used to get away with this only 2 unit per qualification, the validation.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I think your most useful thing is to be, document your rationale for doing it. That's the most important thing, because at the end of the day, that's the intent of the outcome standards, that you demonstrate how you do it, and who's to argue with that as long as it makes sense. So yeah. Imran, I just want to make sure that I answer this question, confirming that the validation needs to be done pre-assessment and post-assessment when delivering a new product. So basically, all assessment tools should be reviewed prior to use, and validation needs to be done on the student assessment, and that's, as per the risk factors that we've talked about. So yeah, the use of the term training product is tricky, and even I often think as well, the whole validation moderation, because in the old days we used to call validation, that was like what you did before you use the assessments, and moderation was when you were looking at the student work, but then it all changed, and I think the definitions have made people a bit confused.
Thank you, Sally.
Yeah. Any more questions? No. All right. Okay, great. Well, we might finish up there. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Always lots to talk about. We might make the next activity a bit longer. Depends what it is. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful day, and see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.